have had any experience with cancer, which I think unfortunately many of us have, it affects the whole family. It's really a family disease, and nobody had it harder than Patrick, but the whole family had quite an ordeal to deal with. The first 7 months or so of treatment were the most intense, and that's when Patrick was the sickest. The chemotherapy really is poison. You're poisoning those cancer cells, and he was really sick. And then for the last 12 months or so, we thought things would get better. He entered what they call the maintenance phase, and the treatment isn't quite as rigorous, but it's still continuing. But we thought at that point, oh great, the worst is behind us, things are going to start getting better, Patrick's going to feel better, we'll get back to normal, and it was not right, it was wrong. We were wrong to think that, and we were very disappointed. It was very challenging. When Patrick entered that phase, the physical effects lessened, but that's when we started seeing all of the emotional effects of cancer. That's when we all, especially Patrick, had a chance to sort of stop and think, what happened? Why me? A little bit, not too much, but why me? How did this happen? What happens if it comes back? And it was just a very trying emotional time. It happened also, we entered that maintenance phase right when Daniel started playing JV basketball at Magruder High School. We were thrilled for him when he made the team. He was very excited. And we had been thinking, oh great, Patrick will feel better, we'll get involved in basketball, everything will be normal. Patrick wasn't feeling better. He felt it was very hard for about 4 months. We went through a really, really difficult time, but we were going to those basketball games. And that gave Patrick those little windows of time when he really wasn't thinking about cancer, and he wasn't worried about treatment, and he wasn't worried about recurrence. He went to the basketball games, he fell in love with the JV team and the varsity team. And we would go to the JV games and stay for the varsity games. And during those maybe 4 hours, 2 or 3 times a week, all our cares were left behind. And Patrick, when the season first started, Patrick had just finished that really difficult time in chemo. He was bald, he was sick, he had just come off of 3 transfusions and about a 4-day stay in the hospital, like the week before the season started. As the season went on, he did start to feel physically stronger. He started to feel better, but there were times, and we talk about it in the book, when he would sleep through the JV game and wake up to watch the varsity game. And I'd say, come on, we should go home. Why don't we go home? You're exhausted. He was not leaving. He would go down and sit right behind the varsity bench. I was talking to some of the varsity players' parents during that time, and we were talking about what a big fan Patrick was and how he would go out onto the court to meet the players and he would shake their hands, and how important it was to him that they all those players acknowledged him, they looked at him, they shook his hand, they thanked him, they talked to him, and how big that was. And I was telling some parents, and they said, we talked about his big wish, and it's in the book. Because of the lymphoma, he was able to participate in the Make-A-Wish program. And he said to me one day, he thought he might want to wish to meet Coach Harwood and the Magruder Colonels basketball team. That might be his big wish. Some people wish for Disney World, some people wish for Hawaii. Patrick wanted to meet Coach Harwood, who's here, Coach Harwood, and his lovely wife, Rosemary. And that was his big wish. And I said, well, let's hold off, and we'll, maybe we can make that happen. And sure enough, one of the parents emailed Coach Harwood. And I never expected that he would say, no, we're not going to do that. But I really thought he might say, we'll do it after the season. He can stop by. But he didn't. He said, he invited Patrick to act as honorary co-captain at a game. He told his team all about Patrick. He said Patrick at that game could sit on the bench. Coach Harwood would introduce him, and he could be part of the team for that night. And Patrick was thrilled. And I don't know what Coach Harwood said to the team about Patrick. I don't know what he told them at practice about that night. But I know that he did not tell them, now you make sure you're nice to Patrick Boehlert, and you make sure you talk to him when he wants to talk to you, and make sure that you look him in the eye and you shake his hand. I don't think he told them that. I think he told them who Patrick was, but those young men took it upon themselves to reach out to Patrick and to establish their own relationships with him. They didn't tell anybody about it. They weren't looking for recognition. They didn't know a book was going to be written about it. These extraordinary young men decided, they saw Patrick, they started on their own individually to start befriending him and accepting him. And I'll tell you, that night of the big game was the best night of Patrick's life, and I'll tell you more about that. But it was all those little things that seemingly were not extraordinary at the time. If I told you someone said hello to me, or someone called Patrick by name, that doesn't seem extraordinary. But this book tells you how those little things that are seemingly inconsequential, those little interactions, how they can make a difference in someone's life. They can be life-changing. You just don't know the impact that you have on people. And so I'd like to first, I'm just going to do a couple of readings from the book. The first thing is right at the very beginning. It's a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that I think really sums up what the young men did. And it goes, everyone can be great because anybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and your verb agree to serve. You don't have to know the second theory of thermodynamics and physics to serve. You only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. That's what you need to make a difference to someone. You don't have to be trained. You just have to be kind. You have to want to do it. That's what these young men did. And then, as Mr. Wimborne said, it expanded. It wasn't just the players. It was the coaches. It was the families. It was the fans who all started to recognize Patrick and all on their own started to reach out to him and include Patrick in the team life. He went to team dinners. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to go back to that big night. Because that big night, I'm not trying to minimize the big night, the big game, basketball game where Patrick was the honorary co-captain. That night was a huge game. It came toward the very end of the season. It was against our arch rivals, the Sherwood Warriors. And we had beaten them earlier in the season, and this was going to be a big rematch. The gyms for these games always sell out. They're always at capacity. The student sections are rowdy. I mean, they bring extra security because everybody's just going crazy. Really, really fun, exciting games. And Coach Harwood didn't flinch. He just didn't hesitate. He said, absolutely, Patrick can be the co-captain at that game. We thought Patrick would go, sit on the bench, Coach Harwood would introduce him. You know, that would kind of be it. But I want to read to you how the evening, how it actually went. So picture this, the gym is full, the student sections are going crazy, the teams have warmed up and they've left, you know, they're right before they're coming in to warm up. They're having to turn people away, and when everybody might think that the teams are completely 100% focused on that game, their game plan, the strategy, the offense, breaking the press, whatever it is, the teams are about to come into the gym. Patrick had gone back with the teams to the locker room, and I thought that teams would come out to warm out, and Patrick would come out and he'd wait by the bench, and this is how it went. When the loud music started, signaling that the Magruder team was about to enter the gym, the crowd started clapping and cheering. Then we saw him, Patrick, holding the ball and leading the team in. Usually Joe Emirasabi would lead the team, he's one of the captains. Usually Joe Emirasabi would lead the team into the gym before the game. But on February 4th, 2011, there was Patrick, jogging just ahead of Joe, leading the Magruder Colonels in. He said later that it was Joe's idea for Patrick to be at the front of the line. I couldn't believe it. He turned the ball over to Joe, who started the layup lines with the other players. Patrick went onto the court to slap hands with each player as he came back around to the line. He was having the time of his life. What was so exciting for him was that he was acting like and being treated like any other varsity player. It was very important to him that he was not there as the sick kid who was being honored. He was there as part of that team, and the players accepted him. He was on the court, he shook hands with them, he slapped their hands. Every once in a while he would look up at us and give us a little smile, but in general he was just part of that team. The whole scene was very poignant because Patrick's hair had just started growing back. I had taken him to the barbershop that day to get a trim because it was just starting to grow back and he thought it looked a little shaggy. It was the first haircut he had needed in the whole time, you know, since the chemo started. Patrick was wearing the Magruder basketball shirt that Coach Harwood had given him. He was wearing the team shoes that he had used his own Christmas money to buy, and all that really mattered to him was looking as much like a team member as possible. I don't think I was the only one with tears in my eyes as I watched and clapped for Patrick and the team. Because he was not just sitting on the side. He was part of the team that night, and that's thanks to Coach Harwood and all those young men. Joe saying, no, Patrick, you lead us in. Here, you take the ball, you run in there. And when the team runs in, the place goes crazy. And that was all, for Patrick leading the Colonels in, leading his team in. He did go on that day to sit on the bench, go in the locker room. He was in every huddle. He stood out in the lines when they introduced the starting lineups. And that night was really extraordinary, and it really was the best night of his life so far. But that's not after that event. People would come to me and say, oh, I was there. I saw that. That was fabulous. Or I saw it on the news, or I read it in the paper, and that was great. And I would say, it was great. But that's not the real story. The real story is what these young men and their families did every day when they talked to Patrick, when they saw him. Coach Harwood very generously invited Patrick to come to practices after that. He did, and Patrick did. Patrick went to every practice except one. He went to every team dinner. Coach Harwood gave him a ride, and those young men accepted him, and still to this day, they have a relationship with Patrick. They still talk to him, they hang out with him, they play basketball with him. We had a book launch party in November. Every player came back this past November. Players are 2 years in college, 1 year in college. Every one of them came back for that night. Everyone. And they let Patrick play ball with them. It was a wonderful night. The whole Magruder community was there. All the coaches came, their families came, and the whole community came so that we could say thank you for what you did for Patrick. And the point of the story really is, to me, that you don't know the impact you have on someone. We wrote this book because we want to tell everybody what this particular group of young people did. And it was amazing, and they had no idea a book was being written until a year and a half later. We kept it kind of quiet because we weren't sure exactly how it would go. We told them about it. They continued to just befriend Patrick, support him, talk to him. When we decided we needed to get the whole team together and talk about the book and what we were doing, I needed to get releases from them. We had them over for pizza and basketball one Friday night. They all came. We had 13 young men they were home from college, whatever. We had them in our house eating pizza, and I was telling them the story. They had no idea what they had done for Patrick. You could have heard a pin drop when I was talking to these young men. Not one person looked at a phone, not one person, went back for more pizza. They listened. Some of them had tears in their eyes. They had no idea. They weren't talking to each other. They weren't talking to the coaches. They were just lifting Patrick up. And even the coaches, when they read it, said they had no idea. They had seen some of the things, but they had no idea what these men were doing, so young men. So part of the reason, the big impetus for writing this was to let people know what they did, to tell people what the real story was on a day-to-day basis. But the second reason was to tell young people that you can do that. You can make that difference for someone. Everybody has that opportunity to just acknowledge someone, talk to someone, make someone's life better, help them out. It doesn't take much. It takes knowing their name and listening to them when they talk. That's what it's about. And it's written for the adults who either have kids or work with kids, for all the Coach Harwoods of the world. Well, there's only one Coach Harwood. But, for all the aspiring Coach Harwoods in the world who work with young people, because Coach Harwood always says to his teams that young kids look up to you, like you're NBA players. You might as well be an NBA player. Younger kids are looking up to you. You guys can use that. So to the adults who have kids, I get sort of bogged down. I have Patrick and his two brothers, Daniel and Brian, who are teenagers. And we all get frustrated with the oversleeping and missing the bus and slamming the door and all that. But young people, we need to remember that the young people that we're dealing with are smart, and they're funny, and they're caring, and they're compassionate, and they can make a difference. And to the young people, I would say you are so powerful with what you can do every day. Every time you encounter someone, you have a chance to make a difference. So I just want to leave you with that thought. Say that's why we wrote the book.